There's so much information out there about how to best upscale your photos properly. Most methods concentrate on how the files look on the screen when viewed at 100, 200, 300%. In this video, I'm going to examine the effects of upscaling photos on the final print output using a few of the most current popular methods. Let's get started. Hi, I'm Mahesh Thapa, and welcome to another Adorama TV episode on printing. Last time I offered some fundamental tips to get the most detailed and color-accurate prints for your images. A link to that video is in the description below. I brought up the concept of upscaling your images. In this video, I want to compare how 6 different methods of upscaling affects the final print quality. I'll also compare all those prints to a print made from the original high-resolution file. Let's first go over a few basic ground rules and parameters for this showdown. 1. The original is a 9000 by 6000 pixel file, so 54 megapixel, raw with default sharpening of 20 applied in Lightroom and saved in high-quality level 10 JPEG from Photoshop. The original file was then downsampled by a factor of 4 in the longest dimension to a resolution of 2250 by 1500, resulting in just a 3.375 megapixel file. The downsampling was done in Photoshop using the default parameters in the image resize dialog box. 3. The downsampled file was then upsampled back to 9000 by 6000 pixels using 6 different methods. 4. All 7 files, the original and the 6 upscaled versions, were then uploaded to Printique's website and printed on metallic paper and then mounted on foam core. I really like using a reputable place like Printique to make print comparisons like this because I know that any variation in final print quality won't be because of the method used to make the prints. They use top-notch archival paper and ink and are extremely color accurate. Now, let's go to the computer and examine the software and upscaling steps in detail. Alright, here's the original file. This is a picture from Iceland taken from a helicopter. And if you look on the right hand side, you notice that the default sharpening I've applied is at about 20, radius 1.0, detail of 25. And if we just zoom up on this, you get the idea of how sharp this image is. We're now going to take this image into Photoshop and downsample it, and then use various software to upsample that downsampled image and see how it compares with the original. Here's a folder of the images, the downsampled and the various upsampled JPEG versions that I use to make prints from. So here's the downsampled one. If you get the information on this, you can see that indeed it is 2250 by 1500, so that's less than 4 megapixels, and the file size is about 1.5 megabytes. Now the original in JPEG format, if you look at the parameters for this, we notice that it is about 9000 by 6000, about 54 megapixels. And if we look at the various upsampled images, the manually upsampled version where I just dragged it from one corner to the other, and that's about 10 megabytes. So the biggest file size is the one created by Gigapixel. It's about 17 megabytes, but the other ones are, somewhere between 10 and 12 megabytes or so. All right, let's go to imagelarger.com and see how it handles the up-resolution process. It's imglarger.com, and when you get here, you notice there are some limitations to what you can upload. JPEG or PNG maximum size 5 megabytes or 4000 by 4000. Not a problem for us because our downsample size is only 1.5 megabytes, and it's definitely much smaller than what this allows, and the pixel ratio also, because it's about less than 4 megapixels. So at this point, all you do is click on the image, you choose your downsampled original here, go open, and then you let it do its thing. But first you have to choose what size you want. I'm going to upscale it to 4. The free or trial version just allows you to 2 or 4. That's good enough for us. And then you hit the start menu and it finishes up. I've already done this, so I'm going to show you the images when it's done. Let's now go to bigjpeg.com and see how that does. And here's this website, very simple looking. You select the image as before, and you have to go and select my downsampled original. And once that's selected, again, this has some limitations also as far as file size, megapixel, things like that. You hit the start process, it does its thing, and then I've already done it, as I said before, and we'll take a look at that in Photoshop and see how that is. So here is the downsampled JPEG. I'm going to take this image and upsample it with Gigapixel, and I'm going to show you how I would do that. Under File, go under Automate, and then choose Topaz Gigapixel AI. And then at this point, just to make everything fair, I am going to just use the automatic setting, which uses AI. You can choose standard, compressed, architectural, or art. I'm just going to leave it standard. Here, it sort of gives you a preview. 4x is already chosen, and then you hit apply, and then you're done. Here is the downsampled image. To enlarge it using Photoshop, I would simply just go to Image, Image Size, and then when the parameter comes up, I would change this to pixels and choose 9,000. So that automatically generates 6,000 for me. Resample, I'm going to say automatic using its automatic AI system and hit OK. It'll generate an upscaled image in Photoshop. So in Lightroom, here is the downsampled JPEG image. Now, if I were to up-res this image using the algorithm built into Lightroom, I would just right-click, say Export, and choose my parameters. So here, I would say JPEG quality 80 or 100, whatever you want to do. So let's leave it at 80 for the time being. And as far as the color space, I would use P3. And then coming down here, I would just make sure that the resize to fit is selected, and I'm going to choose the long edge, and I'm going to make this 9,000 because that would give me 54 megapixels. And make sure that your don't enlarge isn't selected, and then I would choose this as 300 dpi just to make everything fair. And oftentimes I just choose sharpen for, and I would say since I'm using the paper is metallic, it's going to be closest to glossy, and I just put standard amount of sharpening. And that's what I did to export this image for final print. I've left the downsample as is here just to show you how you could just upsample this manually. Let's make this a little smaller, and I would just click on the downsampled, select pixels, and then go edit free transform, and then just bring it up here like so, and then just I've got snapping turned on, so it should be just fine. Go right to the edge. So here is the downsampled image that's manually upscaled. That's what I mean by manually upscaling. So technically this should be the worst out of all the methods that I have done. So select, deselect. Let's take a look at these images. Just looking at it as a gestalt, downsampled, this is Photoshop upsampled, Lightroom upsampled, image larger, upsample. Now, I already noticed that the image larger, the colors are slightly different than on the other ones that I've looked at so far. If I look at, for example, Lightroom again, the greens look a little bit more vibrant than here. There's a slight shift to the colors. Again, image larger versus Gigapixel. See that warmth comes back with Gigapixel, and we lose it a little bit here on the image larger. So there's little color shift difference there. So let's go to Gigapixel, Big Jpeg, and this is the original. The original and image larger. You see the difference in colors? It's maybe hard to notice, but it's subtle, but it is definitely there. So let's compare all of these as slightly larger versions, okay? Let's go to 100%. So this is the manually upsampled version. It's a little soft at the pixel level. Compared that to Photoshop, Photoshop is a little better. It's a little bit more contrasty. I see a little bit more crispness, maybe a little bit of haloing here at the high contrast images, high contrast borders. This is the downsample Photoshop. Now let's see Photoshop compared to Lightroom. Little less sharpening on the Lightroom, but I prefer it. I think it may be because of some of the parameters I chose when I exported the Lightroom. Again, Photoshop apparently looks a little bit more contrasty, but maybe a little over sharpened, at least for the pixel level. Now Lightroom compared to Image Larger, again, you notice the Image Larger looks remarkably clean and the detail is great, but there's a shift in that color. The greens look completely different here versus here. Even the blues of the water, it looks a lot more cooler, but the detail is actually quite amazing. Look at how well, just compare this with what Lightroom did. Lightroom looks appreciably less sharp. Okay, so this is Image Larger. So I'm impressed so far with what Image Larger has done compared to the rest, but that color shift is a little bit disconcerting. Let's compare Image Larger with Gigapixel. See, some of that warm color actually has come back on the Gigapixel, yet I see no appreciable change in the amount of sharpening. The sharpening with Gigapixel still looks really good. Again, here's Image Larger. So the amount of sharpening I think is very similar between Image Larger and Gigapixel, but Gigapixel maintains the true colors a little better. So let's compare Gigapixel with Big Jpeg. Again, Big Jpeg is also doing a pretty good job. Let's look at Gigapixel, Big Jpeg. So it's really personal preference. I think I could probably make Big Jpeg or Gigapixel look like one of the others with a little more tweaking. I feel the amount of detail is very similar. If I had to give the edge minimally, I think it would be Gigapixel over Big Jpeg. But Image Larger, detail-wise, does very well compared to Gigapixel and Big Jpeg. Now let's compare Big Jpeg compared to the original. So here original, I mean, it's close. It's really close. The details look obviously much more natural. It appears less digitally sharpened than original. So here is Big Jpeg. Big Jpeg does look a little bit more contrasty, which is not necessarily a bad thing. Again, looking over here, Big Jpeg, original. You know, the original can still undergo much more sharpening and still look very natural. So the original compared to Gigapixel, wow, Gigapixel has really done a nice job. I may tone down the sharpening just a little bit on Gigapixel to match it more, but it's really done a remarkable job given that it started with a 3 megapixel image and went to something like this. Now let's compare the original with Image Larger. Yeah, you notice the shift in color again. Let's go to this part right here. This is what the original color is supposed to be like, and it's a little cooler on the Image Larger. And going to Lightroom, yeah, it's subtle. I think maybe if I would have increased the parameters for sharpening, that may have gotten closer to the original. And looking at Photoshop, you know, it's very similar. And downsampled, again, it's actually not super bad. It's probably the worst out of all of them, but I wonder how this would translate into print. So there you go. Those are all the various methods and how they appear on the screen at least. Now let's go to the prints, and I'm going to present them to you one by one. I'm unsure how this will turn out over YouTube, but let's give it a try. Could you appreciate any differences at all in the prints? I asked 6 non-photographer and photographer friends to look at the prints independently from 2 feet away and rank them. The results were all over the place. Somewhat surprisingly, the consistent loser was image larger, not because it lacked detail, but because the colors were somewhat muted when compared side by side to the others. The manual upsample was also towards the bottom, but 2 people, both of them non-photographers, actually ranked it higher than Lightroom and Photoshop. What conclusions, if any, can we draw from this? Well, we have to judge the findings in the context of some limitations. Perhaps if I had made the prints even larger, then there might have been some consistent results. However, I'm unsure of that. I chose 24 by 36 inch prints because, in my experience, most people don't really make prints larger than this, and this is about as large a print as I can see comfortably from a viewing distance of about 2 feet. Subject matter being printed likely also plays a role. In another video, I'd like to make similar comparisons with portraits and wildlife. I didn't tweak every single setting in all software. I started out with a clean, low ISO file taken on high quality equipment, so didn't feel the need to make too many changes to parameters such as noise reduction. I used JPEG rather than TIFF. Perhaps using TIFF files would have made some difference, but I'm doubtful. Besides, the online software in the free or trial versions only allowed for JPEG files less than 5 megabytes. Given the above limitations, here's what I think, and you can let me know your thoughts in the comment section. 1. For prints of landscape scenes, there's very little difference in what method you use to upscale your images. If you already have Lightroom or Photoshop, I think you can just stick with one of those. Well, perhaps you shouldn't just manually upscale images by dragging from the corners. Number 2, when comparing prints, colors and contrast seem to matter more, or those elements are more conspicuous than overall sharpness and detail. 3, how detailed an image looks on the screen at 100% will not necessarily mean the same amount of detail will be appreciated on prints, at least up to 24 by 36 inch prints. Number 4, viewing distance matters. It matters a lot. This is perhaps one of the most overlooked and under-considered elements when people pixel peep on a screen. 5, if you're taking images for social media or to display on a high-resolution monitor, then resolution matters a lot, more than for making prints. This is almost counterintuitive because I always hear people argue that they need very high resolution cameras because they want to make huge prints. I think we need high resolution cameras because we want to be able to crop with abandon and still have enough resolution to post online and display on our screens. If you found this video helpful, please remember to like it. Also, don't forget to subscribe to Adorama TV and click the notification bell. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.